Hi everybody, it's Cash. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. Today I have some really interesting stuff for you about Jeffrey Epstein. First of all, I did his handwriting. That proved to be so fascinating and so revelatory. And later on, I will tell you what happened when I made another attempt at his transition pictures. I think this is about the 5th time I've tried. And the results are always inconclusive and always mysterious. But each one provides a little extra piece in the puzzle of what happened to Jeffrey Epstein. Do I really need to go into any details of who he was or what he was? We know he was a financier and very rich, had his own island and private jets and so on. And also a sex trafficker of the most horrific kind, with lots of socialite friends and very famous friends. And because documents have been released recently, revealing some of the names of famous people who were connected to Epstein in some way, not necessarily always in a bad way, but were connected to Epstein, his name has come to the fore again, rehashing the old mysteries of what happened to him in 2019. So, as part of that renewed interest, 60 Minutes on CBS produced a piece of his handwriting. You can see it there. It has their watermark all the way through it. But from that little piece of handwriting, which was written from his prison cell, I was able to get the energy to analyze it. And this is what it said. Now, bear in mind, this is actually pretty long because that's a fairly large sample. But what it tells us about him is particularly fascinating. So I'm not going to cut it short. I'll just tell you the whole thing. And then when I've done this, we'll look at his transition pictures. In the meantime, this is what his handwriting says to me. Bear in mind, he was alive when he wrote it, so it's all in the present tense. Surprisingly, he's a friendly, good-humoured, charming guy with an excellent sense of humour, who is able to direct these attributes in the furtherance of his aims when he wants something. At that point, his inviting, bon vivant personality becomes manipulative and self-serving, as if to say, hey, we're renegades, rules don't apply to us, we can do what we want, so why don't you come along for the ride and let's see how far we can go. It almost feels like a sense of entitlement, as if he's above the usual restraints and responsibilities that the rest of us embrace as the norm. He's the independent type, ambitious, super interested in making and retaining money. He was a financier, so that makes sense, and highly adept at feathering his own nest. Also, highly conscientious when he applies himself to something. There's a reserved, recoiled feel to parts of the handwriting, suggesting that if you overstep the mark with him, he'll just shut you out, and that will be the end of that. He leans towards being methodical, careful, and considered in his behaviour, though often with a me-first mentality, accompanied by a desire to cream some off the top for himself in whatever he does. He gets a rush of empowerment from involving others in his passions or interests, even though, essentially, he has a lone wolf attitude most of the time and feels distinctly separate from those around him. In social circles, he gains satisfaction from their satisfaction, but that's about it. Even in a crowd, he could feel out of step, remote. Appearances are highly deceptive in that respect. He's not as he seems. Emotionally, he's a lot more disengaged than you realize. Insular, almost. Odd that he would have an island. Insular. Pensive, sensitive, and once removed from even close involvements. You might not know this, simply because what he allows you to see are things like bonhomie and his imposing determination and willfulness, along with a certain contrived showmanship that will have less astute people falling for his wiles. He's like a wicked Tinkerbell who's able to fly only because he's told himself he can. There's something profoundly unsettling about his inner drives that has him acting in ways that, If he thought twice about what he's doing, he might reconsider. But hey, he's Tinkerbell. He's magical. He's flying. Why would he want to come back down to earth? How tedious. How normal. At least, this is what is going on at a superficial level. It's a front. On the inside, at a subconscious level, he's in hiding, sheltered, like the puppeteer in a Punch and Judy show, operating his hand puppet from down below, out of sight of the crowd. He's hungry for new experience and gobbles it up. At one point, he was consulting scientists about an idea he'd had for impregnating about 20 women, maybe more, with his own sperm, so that he could seed a whole new wave of the human race with his DNA, producing lots of little Jeffrey Epsteins, apparently, but as horrific as that sounds. But anyway, he may even become impatient with those whom he considers narrow-minded, or stuffy, or unadventurous, or who don't live up to his expectations. There's a sense of glee here about having things done his way. His mental process involves an aspirational, almost fantasy element, one that lifts him up to realms of possibility that feel exhilarating to him in the moment, but which are in serious need of grounding. He may convince himself that something is a good idea when it's not, that it's worth doing when more circumspect minds would advise against it. He could become imbued with a prospect or challenge or goal and simply run with it because it sounds like a great idea and tremendous fun. He probably isn't surrounded by many realists. And when he does encounter a realist, he's irritated by their limited vision or their unwillingness or inability to let go and just join in. He's like a 5-foot-tall man who wishes he was 7 feet tall. That way he could play professional basketball. But he's not. So, undeterred, he attaches powerful springs to his feet that allow him to jump that much higher, all the while knowing that the extra reach that the springs give him is a complete sham. If you were of a like mind to Mr. Epstein, you would find his overreach captivating, and even sometimes believe he's really 7 feet tall. The sense of possibility, the wide open vistas. If that's not your wavelength, it will likely baffle you. He isn't a team player, even at those times when he seems to be. Rather, he extends himself in such a way that has you thinking he's fully engaged with you and that you're best pals. Of course, this is a sham too, since internally he's so aloof and distant. A lot of what you see is just performance, a fabrication, meaning that your opinion of him is going to be based on a range of falsehoods he's projecting deliberately in order to ingratiate himself with you and draw you in. Actually, he seems quite disturbed. His emotions are all over the place, but he likely chooses to ignore that and override them. Let's just do it. That way he doesn't have to consider consequences. Consequences are boring, limiting, grounding, realistic. Something from his past, his childhood, his upbringing, still fuels his sense of self, but not in a helpful way, and his continued delusion about who he is and what he can do. He is strangely idealistic, just not in ways that are compatible with other people's version of what's doable or appropriate, or I guess decent. He's game for the game, eager for the ride. He may be a snob when it comes to selecting higher level pleasures. It's all part of his fantasy experience, his quest for a buzz, a thrill. He may even be repulsed by some of the people he has to deal with, but accepts that handling them is just part of the job. A lot of his inner resistance or annoyance may find an outlet through physical acts, sex, or sexually related pursuits, for example. It is not pleasurable necessarily so much as it is a release of tension. External danger used as a catalyst for inner peace. Isn't that strange? Now, this next bit relates to his time in prison. This is how he was feeling on the day in August 2019, when I guess he wrote this note. He is infuriated when his dreams are punctured, say by being arrested and charged. Justice wrecks everything. He has an oversized capacity for framing his life and outlook and experience exactly the way he wants them to be, which is great when things are going his way. But reality and rules barge in and restrict that. At the point of writing the note, he's realized that the balloon has burst. His hopes have been crushed, and a vast, immovable ceiling of reality has been placed over any chance he might have of making things better or getting out of the predicament he's in. This is a relatively new experience for him, and one he doesn't like. Mainly because it's boring. He just found rules and laws, restrictions, and you can't do this or you shouldn't do this, tedious. He wanted to push those bounds and see how far he could get, because he had a sense that he was above it all. He was above the norm. He wasn't one of us. He was rich and free and had famous friends, and he could do what he wanted. That's what I came away with from that writing. And obviously in prison, when he saw that he wasn't ever going to be released, everything came crashing down. Jeffrey Epstein died in August of 2019. And since then, I have done his transition pictures, or tried to, about 5 times maybe. And it's never satisfactory. It never brings any kind of closure or resolution. The pictures are different each time, but they do point to a similar scenario. For example, there was one set where he was flying along and he hit a wall. There's very often a tunnel that they enter when they're getting sick or something is happening that leads to their death. And the tunnel was there, but he hit the wall beside it, was winded by the impact, but then just walked off and away, past the tunnel, and never went down it. There were other sets of pictures where he was ducking down in a trench and running along. Another one where he was going through windy tunnels and ended up on what looked like a plane flying through the air. None of them were ever about Jeffrey Epstein crossing over, transitioning in the normal way and going into the light, which has happened with every other person I've ever done, in some form. The pictures change, but the result is always the same. So, since he was in the news, even though I promised I would never do them again, because it just frustrates me that I can't get any kind of closure, I decided I would do them again. Now, I as a person, I always say this, I as a person believe he died in 2019 and he's no longer with us. There are people who say, no, he's still alive, he's had a facelift, he's in hiding, all these things, but we don't know. And I do remember the pictures that I did where he was behind a wall of some strange kind, and there were bars made they looked like lightning, actually. And these bars were stopping him crawling through the gap in the wall. He knew there was a gap, he knew there was something on the other side, a life or something, but these jagged lightning-like bolts in the wall prevented him climbing through. So there is a possibility he is somewhere with a new face, new identity, and living a life. But I thought I would do it again and see what happened. So back we go to 2019, and when I went into the energy this time, Jeffrey Epstein was standing on the top of a train. That often relates to a person's confidence that all is going to be well. They've got a kind of exhilarated feeling of movement, of direction, and trains commonly relate to career path and where you're going in life. You're whizzing along. It's very energized, very dynamic, very kinetic. And he was on the top of this train. But up ahead was a tunnel. Unfortunately, it was coming at him too fast. After he entered the tunnel and was in the dying process, that's what that tunnel usually means, he didn't carry on the train. He shot up through the earth. It was almost like he dug his own tunnel. He went upwards, propelled by the level of acceleration and the momentum he already had. This shot him up his own little tunnel until he stopped. And he was just above a dome-shaped space. If you haven't seen these kinds of pictures before, there are a couple of dome-like caves that happen when I go into this kind of energy, connected by a tunnel. People arrive in the first cave area, they go up the tunnel somehow, and they arrive in a second cave-like dome area with a white light membrane in it, and that's what they step into. He missed this. He had made his own tunnel, and he went straight past it, and then just got stuck. He stopped in the metaphorical earth. So these pictures fell into three parts. The first part, where he was on the train, riding along, feeling exhilarated and everything was going well. Then I assume he got arrested and charged and so on. The second part was making his own little tunnel off the main tunnel and burrowing through until he stopped and got stuck. The third part was the most mysterious, because what I saw next was the two caves I always see and the tunnel between them, but from the outside, as though they were completely artificial. They were a set. And he was on the outside of the set. And he wandered around and could not get in. At one point in the pictures, he walked up to the wall of the cave where the dome would be if this were a real situation and the dome was on the inside. He walked up to it and touched the walls as if to say, "Let me in." It's entirely possible that the situation he's in now, if he is alive and the conspiracy theory people are right, is too restrictive for him. And he almost wishes he were gone. That's what that felt like. I wish I could go into there. Equally, it could be that he is dead, which is what I believe. And for people like Epstein, troubled souls, people in denial of normal human behavior and rules and so on, and principles and standards and values, maybe there is some kind of, I don't know what you would call it, interstitial waiting place. And you're not allowed to go into the normal transition process. Those are the only two options I can think of here. Maybe you can think of others, but the only two options are, one, that he's not dead and he's still living, but wishes that things had gone differently, or that he is dead, which is what I believe, and he's stuck in limbo. There's no time on that side of the divide. So none of us could ever say how long it would take for him to complete that process. But I couldn't get him into the interior of the set. He couldn't even see it. There were just two domes and a tunnel between, and he was excluded. It was a closed set, as they say in the movie industry. That's it. That's what I got for him this time. And it is not the same as what I got previously, but it's in the same ballpark of a guy who is not in the transition process that everybody else goes through. normal people, famous people, Jesus, Buddha, whatever. They all go through some version of that transition. And Jeffrey Epstein didn't. Make of that what you will. But once again, it is unsatisfactory. It's incomplete. And we don't have closure. But more importantly, neither does Jeffrey Epstein. It seems. All right, thanks very much for watching, guys. And I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.